church. Do I need to preach now? I'm not. Church might be over. That was amazing. That was amazing. I don't even know what to say now. Well, how about this? You ever have any trouble going to sleep at night because your brain is just like on and on and on and on, and you're so busy laying there thinking about all the things that you didn't get done that day, or the things that you have to do tomorrow, or the things that you got to go next week, or the things that you didn't do, or maybe, I don't know, the things that you did do and totally messed up. I see that. I just want y'all to know I see it when you do that. That's really fun. All the things that have to be done all the time, it just goes in there, and it just goes in all these circles, and it won't stop, and it doesn't really set us up for a really peaceful night's rest, does it? No. What about having trouble resting, relaxing in the evenings because something just needs to be done for work or home or school, or kids have 15 activities, or you think about something and you just can't let it go, and you can't let it be, like the world is going to literally crash and burn because your to-do list today is not complete. Has that ever happened to anybody? See, here's the thing. We create and participate in lives in which our anxiousness is a normal state of being instead of peace. Why do we do this to ourselves? Let's hear from Exodus. Then God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents to the third and fourth generation of those who reject me, but showing steadfast love to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. And you shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and sea and all that is in them, but rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. So there's a lot here to unpack, and we're not going to be able to touch on all of it. But we are doing a series on Sabbath. So this list of commandments, this list of instructions is not a to-do list, but it really is a way for us to learn to live healthier and kinder lives. I read in a book this week called Sabbath in the Suburbs, where this writer and pastor and mom really learned how overscheduled and intense about time our culture has become. She said there was a change in her kids' bus route that made the kids get home later than what they had before. And all the kids in the neighborhood, all their afternoon, after school schedules could not tolerate this change because it would make them late for everything they had to do in the evening. And the whole neighborhood of parents were up in arms about it. They wrote letters and crafted petitions and made phone calls, you name it. Whatever it took for their displeasure to be known, to get that change changed back. And then finally, man, process. Those parents, they had their collective voices known. They won out, and some children on the bus route were able to get home even earlier than they were before by 4 whole minutes. 4 whole minutes. That's amazing. The author says that she realized in that experience that is not the life that she wanted. She says, I didn't want to live the kind of life in which an extra 4 minutes were so crucial to my family's schedule that I would petition the county government to get my way. But the bus stop petition exposed the insanity in my own life too. She says, I too treated time like a scarce commodity to be hoarded. It was a constant struggle to keep from gripping tightly to every 4-minute nugget of time, maximizing every moment, multitasking as if my life depended on it. And that's an interesting realization, and one that might hit a little bit too close to home for some of us. How do we view our time? See, I think many of us, like this woman, would see our time as a scarce commodity, a commodity that can't be wasted on the frivolous pursuit of rest. We're trained to do stuff, to work all the time, to accomplish things all the time. What an exhausting way to live. What if we got it wrong? What if we're meant to live life differently? What if we're not the first people to anxiously grapple with this? We look at our text today, and even here there are some reminders about being anxious about time and production. So let's start with this first reminder that God is the one who saved the people by bringing them out of Egypt. See, in this moment that we're reading about this morning, it hasn't been that long since Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, where they were being worked to death, and they cried out to God to save them, to provide relief from their physical, emotional, and spiritual pain. They were beyond worn out, and they had no more to give. God heard them and called Moses to lead them to a better place. So that's where they are. Moses has led them out of where they are, but they're still not sure how to create a new way of living from what they had before, because what they had before was so abusive and dysfunctional, they don't really know how to craft a new path forward. So they receive from God these instructions on how to form a new society, one based on respect and care to one another and God. Now, to look backwards just a little bit, when they were in Egypt, we're reminded that the Egyptian way of life, from peasant to pharaoh, was all about anxiously producing a commodity. And the Israelites, they had to produce all of those materials for building that society, all of the bricks to build monuments and buildings and roads and all of that. They could never stop. They had to go out and they complained about it. So the solution to their work was adding more work. So now they had to go out and find the straw to throw in the mud to mix it all together. Pharaoh called them lazy when they couldn't complete his unrealistic and abusive expectations. And whatever they did, it was never gonna be enough. See, Pharaoh wasn't satisfied, and he was never gonna be satisfied. There's a theologian, Walter Brueggemann, who suggests that this culture of anxious production created an environment where caring for one's neighbor was impossible. The people were not valued by those in power. They were not afforded basic dignity. They weren't allowed to rest ever. Pharaoh was demanding and cruel. And we can contrast that with how God was not. God was and is a God who creates a better way. God heard and saw their cries for justice, helped them with compassion. God brought them out of Egypt into a better life. There's another commentator who suggests that this commandment, this rule about Sabbath, was the first fair labor law. That is not just a day of rest, but also a day of justice. Everyone and everything is given a time of rest in all of the ways needed. In this text, all people, those in power and those without, are equalized and afforded the same downtime. Animals even are given rest from their burdens. And as the community evolved their understandings of Sabbath, they include rest for the land and even a release from debts, which is another kind of rest. See, this understanding of Sabbath is building a society based on compassion and care for one another, and the idea that justice is for everyone instead of being a society that is constantly on the make and looking out for what can be gained or taken from another. But more importantly, what this kind of idea of society is showing us is the character of God, because it is God who is setting forth these expectations about being a community. It is God who did and continues to care about justice. It is God who has compassion for all people and wants to provide a way for all people to get what they need from one another. But part of the question for us, when we're asking about what Sabbath could be for us in our modern context and world, is asking about what we think is important, and then asking if we think that that's what God thinks is important. Perhaps, just throwing this out here, perhaps not viewing one another and ourselves as a commodity to be used up until we're physically, emotionally, and spiritually depleted. See, we live in a society where enough is never enough, where we've all got to make our bricks or make others make bricks constantly. We may be losing sight of what is enough. See, we're worth more than that. You are worth more than that. We know this intellectually, and yet we act like it's not true or we can't change it. And ultimately, this is an issue of trust. Do we trust God enough to take care of us in our rest as much as we trust ourselves to take care of us in our brick making? Is that why we have such trouble with the Sabbath? Here's the thing. If we continue to see ourselves as a commodity and our value is only that which we can produce, we'll never be enough. It's impossible. It's impossible. We will never be able to make enough bricks to satiate Pharaoh or whatever other idol we have built in our lives. We have to find a way to get off that hamster wheel. We have to find a way to resist the temptation of more, always more, as if more is ever an answer to what we need for our soul. Brueggemann suggests that we are restless. And that's why we're always seeking more, because we have an endless pursuit of greater security and greater happiness, a pursuit that is always unsatisfied because we haven't gotten enough yet. So how can we get to the yet? He suggests that Sabbath, the very act of Sabbath itself, is an act of resistance to that restlessness and unsatisfied pursuit of more. That Sabbath ensures restfulness and not restlessness is at the center of our lives. The Sabbath is also a resistance that makes room for just to see if we don't allow ourselves to rest, are we going to let anyone else around us rest? Of course not. So then we become Pharaoh, demanding more and more and more bricks to be made in place around us, putting our unrealistic expectations upon them, perpetuating a dysfunctional system in which no one can be anything but used up. See, through the practice of Sabbath, we create space for our neighbor to experience and have what they need, because it's not all about me. And it's not all about you. It's about all of us. It's about people we don't even know, creating a community together where we put down our unrealistic expectations and demand, where no one frantically starts a campaign for 4 minutes of their day because their time is more important than anyone else's, and they have jammed it so full that everything they're doing has lost its meaning. But while we're figuring out what Sabbath is, we have to remember that Sabbath isn't about taking one day off. See, that's just a technicality. That's just legalism that we're going to want to throw in there and say, well, I take my Sabbath. Look at how awesome that is. That's not what Sabbath is. Sabbath is not taking one day off and then completing the other 6 as business as usual. If we're really serious about our culture's call of more and more and more and resisting the idea that we create everything we need for ourselves and by ourselves, then what we need to do is incorporate an understanding of Sabbath in our everyday life. And we do that by remembering that the true value of our lives, the true measurement of our value, is how God sees us, how God values us. When we begin to see ourselves and other people through that lens, it will radically change how we see everything that we do. See, through the practice of Sabbath, we can have patience for one another, because it doesn't have to be done right now. We can have more compassion for one another, more understanding. It's a way of remembering that we belong to one another instead of competing against one another for every moment of every day, and we can't forget that. We get one life. We know this. Do we want to really spend it on that constant hamster wheel of constant production and competition with one another that goes absolutely nowhere? Did you ever see that wheel actually go anywhere? No. Now, before you think I'm up here wagging my finger at you, because I kind of feel like I'm doing that a little bit today, like, man, if this pulpit could stand it, I'd be up here just hitting it away, right? This is my version of fire and brimstone. So I'm going to tell on myself because I'm really good at that. I get what it feels like to want to accomplish things. I get what it feels like to believe that only you can get something done the right way. Last week, I went to lunch with a friend, and I tried to convince her that I am not an ambitious person. That is exactly what she did. She laughed out loud. To my face. And I'll be honest and confess that I really, really have a hard time taking a full day off a week. Like, not to pick on Sharon, but to pick on Sharon. She calls me out. Her and Seth call me out about that sometimes. Hey, Tabitha, are you taking your day off this week? Mm-mm. How are you? And we're not going to talk about the irony of me being up here giving a sermon on the Sabbath when I was frantically redoing half of it at 9 o'clock last night. So before you think I'm a complete hypocrite, I understand what it's like to want to do more, to want to work and work and work at everything, not just work, but play and home and activities, and do a million things for your kids and all the things for your family. And at the same time, I am reminded about a sermon that I listened to this very week by a pastor in the Kansas City area that shared about his many phenomenal failures in his very public fall from grace and how he lost everything in his life, his ministry, his marriage, his reputation, and he attributed part of that to not taking Sabbath, to not taking his days off, to not taking sabbatical, and working until the wee hours of the morning. And I thought, I don't want that to ever be me. And I bet you don't want that to ever be you either. That burnout just sucks the soul from us. And what we have to remember, what we really need to remember, is that God doesn't hunger for our competitions with one another about how much we can do in our day. God doesn't hunger for the accolades that we want to pile on ourselves so that we can convince ourselves that we are good for something. God doesn't hunger for us to put our kids into 5,000 activities so that our family doesn't see one another and find the rest and time that it needs. God hungers for relationship with us. God hungers to show us how to love, how to care for one another. God hungers for us to know to the very core of our being that we are already worth something. And we don't need to prove it. We're already there. Amen.